Hey class, are you having fun yet with action photography? Well, it's about to get a little cooler and maybe even crazier. So, we're going to talk about this type of photograph, which is panning for action. This is probably one of the most difficult ones out of the three uh, in this module within action photography itself. If you recall, in freezing action, you are standing still. You, the photographer, are not moving while you are looking through your viewfinder, looking or waiting for an action to happen, and you are going to freeze it. And you freeze it using a high shutter speed. That was freezing action. But for panning for action, you are not going to stand still. Well, you are going to stand still, but you're going to move your camera along with the action. And the action you want to shoot should be something that's going left to right or right to left. It shouldn't be going forward, away from you, or coming towards you. It should be going left to right, and I'll talk about why. Um, if you look at this image in this slide, you will see that it looks like it's showing what's called like motion, like it's moving, right? We have the subject here, which is a motorcyclist and a passenger that appear to be an acceptable focus. However, the background is blurred, and because they're on this vehicle, we know that this could be possibly a moving vehicle. It looks like they were captured while they're moving because of the blurry background, but yet they're still in acceptable focus. Well, how is that captured? Well, one, as I mentioned, for panning for action, you are actually moving your camera with the action left to right or right to left, hence the title panning for action. It is key that you follow the image, the object, and keep that within your frame, okay? What's really crucial about this one is that when you actually press the shutter, okay? If, let's say, you have the motorcyclist is coming from my right and I see it in the distance, I'm going to look through my viewfinder and place them somewhere in the center of my frame, and I'm going to follow it. I won't take the picture just yet as I'm barely seeing them because my camera isn't quite moving just yet, right? Now, as I see them approaching closer and closer, I'm going to start moving my camera a little bit more faster, and this movement that you're going to create causes that blur, okay? Now, what type of exposure are we going to need in order to create this blur, okay? The technique for this is a slower shutter speed. So it's very unlike the freezing action shot. Okay, we're talking like 1/30th of a second, or maybe even slower. Okay, that slower shutter speed, in combination with you moving the camera from left to right, will cause that blur. But because you have the subject already in focus, you will get them clear in your frame while the background is going to be blurry. And that blur is because you're moving. Okay. Now think about this: if you have a good exposure, you're at 1/30th of a second, and you're metering the scene. You adjust your aperture accordingly to everything is to the zero. Okay, and you're seeing a person walk in front of you, right? Well, think about the speed of that person walking and how much movement you are going to be doing. You're just kind of just they're walking. You're not really moving very much in your camera, and you're not going to get a very blurry background because you're not moving very fast either. You compare that to, let's say, a speeding vehicle where you got to really keep pace with it from your vantage point, and you're going to be moving and panning that camera much faster, causing a much more blurrier background. Okay, how do we meter for this? Set your camera's ISO to, let's say, 100 or 200. We want to keep it on the lower end to force you to get a lower shutter speed, to allow you to shoot at a lower shutter speed. Okay. Just like the freezing action shot and all these action shots, you're thinking about the shutter first of all, right? So for panning for action, you should be thinking about a slower shutter speed. We're not trying to freeze it, we're trying to show some motion. So we're going to go with 1/30th of a second, or you could even go slower, 1/15th of a second. But why don't you start at 1/30th? Okay, you put it at your ISO 100 or 200, put it at 1/30th of a second, and then why don't you look through your viewfinder and you press the shutter halfway to turn on the meter on the inside to wake the camera up, and then adjust your aperture dial, your f-stop dial, until you get the 0 or right down the middle of your meter, so you have a proper exposure. Okay, now your scene is metered, and now all you got to do is wait for an subject to come into your frame. Remember, it has to be coming left to right or right to left. It shouldn't be coming towards you or away from you, because you're not going to be really moving from that vantage point. Okay, now let's talk about focus. This is because focusing is going to be challenging here. This is why it's one of the more difficult ones. For this particular shot, I will allow you to use an automatic focus. So you could put it back to autofocus. And there's a feature on your digital cameras where you can use a special focus feature for moving objects. For Canon, it is called AI Servo. So look on your manuals how to set your camera to AI Servo. First of all, you have to put it back to automatic focus. And then second, look to see how you can put it on AI Servo. The default for Canon, when you get it out of the box, the focus type is called one shot. That means for non-moving objects. Okay, so for this particular type of action shot, I'll allow you to use AI Servo and autofocus for that. For Nikon, look for something called AFC. C for continuous. Okay, autofocus continuous. That's for moving objects as well. Okay. Key though, what's key here is once you've done practicing and shooting this particular type of shot, put it back to manual mode on your focus. Okay. Also, because if you leave it on, let's say, the continuous focusing mode, and you wanted to say, let's say you wanted to use autofocus again for other purposes, not for panning for action. If that's the case, you got to take it off that continuous focus mode. So make sure for Canon, put it back to one shot in the focus mode, and for Nikon, put it back to autofocus S, as in single. All right. But for the next action photography category, I would like you to put it back in manual. But for this one, let's try in auto, so that way you can get the subject in focus. Okay?